It is NFL trade deadline day. Moves are happening. Injuries continue to pile up. And as always, the need for depth, replacements, and just staying active in general remains key for our fantasy football success this season. I'm John Macri, joined as always by Nate the Great Jahnke. For this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we'll be going over the top waiver wire options heading into Week 10. Nate, the injury Grim Reaper is trying to take me out of commission as well this week. I'm battling a cold, but by Week 10, nobody's 100%. So I hope that you're at least doing better than I am today.
Yeah, luckily I am not dealing with a cold, so hopefully you aren't as well in the near future. It is trade deadline day, so hopefully we get a couple of moves later on. So far, it's all been defensive moves, so nothing to impact a lot of the fantasy football leagues outside of the IDP ones. But if we do get any trades over the course of the day, I will definitely be updating the waiver wire article. So if you're listening to this and something happened and we don't discuss it on the show, definitely check out the article to see where you should be prioritizing any running backs or wide receivers or tight ends who get traded, or the players who now become starters because someone became traded.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're recording this at 9 a.m. We'll probably do about an hour. So anything that happens between 9 and 10, we'll hopefully be able to cover on the show. Anything that happens after that, definitely go check out Nate's article over on pff.com, and you could get access to that with a PFF Plus subscription. Use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off of a PFF Plus subscription as well. That'll get you access to all the articles, all the lock content, all the player grades, rankings, all that good stuff. So make sure to use that. And then, defensive trades. We'll talk about those on the IDP Start Sit show, which I'll record tomorrow. So we'll go into all that stuff in depth there. But otherwise we'll get started here. But feel free to like, subscribe, hype up the channel as well on the YouTube mobile app, all of that stuff that we greatly appreciate and helps us a ton. But Nate, let's get into the waiver wire targets for Week 10, and starting at the quarterback position, Joey Flax here continues to lead the way, which I imagine the reason that he wasn't added in more leagues, mostly because there was some injury concern heading into Week 9, and now he's on a bye week as well. So we get maybe one more week of talking about him, but after that, he's got to cross that 50% rostership threshold, because I don't know what else this guy needs to do to convince people at this point.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine the injury scared a lot of people off heading into this past week, but he threw 470 yards, 4 touchdowns. So he's been the top 2 fantasy quarterback over the past 4 weeks or so, has been excellent in terms of fantasy value. He has 2 of the best wide receivers in the league. The Bengals are often playing from behind, often playing in shootouts like this past week. So I expect Flacco to be in a lot more of those games going forward. They have a pretty decent schedule for quarterbacks over the rest of the way. It's not quite as dominant as it was a couple of weeks ago. They have a couple great matchups, a couple not so great matchups. Week 11, they face the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. But they have a couple of games where you want him in your starting lineup, 2 or 3 where you don't want him. But at this point, if you're picking him up, it's probably because you already have a quarterback and are looking for more competition in the quarterback room. So you can start him for roughly 5 of the weeks over the rest of the season, not for the other 3. And that is fairly good for someone to get off the waiver wire at this point in the year.
Yeah, for sure. And look, he's been awesome as well. I'm always going to try to find new fun Joe Flacco stats to highlight. And since he joined the Bengals in Week 6, 1,254 passing yards, leads the NFL, 11 passing touchdowns over that span, also the most in the NFL. And he is the QB2 for fantasy over that span, averaging 25 points per game. So Joe Flacco has been nothing but awesome since joining the Bengals. Nate, another familiar name, JJ McCarthy, also had a nice game in Week 9 thanks to 2 touchdown passes, 1 rushing touchdown. So JJM off to a nice start here in his return to action, Nate.
Yeah, definitely showed some sparks. Wasn't a perfect first game back, but he's only played 3 games in his NFL career. Expect him to show some rust as well because he hasn't played in a while. But the Vikings have the best schedule for quarterbacks over the rest of the season, and it just gets better as the rest of the year progresses. So I would pick him up now. If you do need a quarterback for this week, he is not the worst option. But after that, the schedule just keeps getting better and better. So if McCarthy improves like we hope he does over the course of more starts, then especially during the fantasy playoffs, he is someone who could have an excellent fantasy playoffs. There's not too many quarterbacks with great schedules, especially those available on the waiver wire. So I would definitely like to take a chance on McCarthy, both if you need someone this week because they do play the Baltimore Ravens, defense that's a lot of fantasy points, and a team where the Vikings will probably have to be throwing a lot and trying to score a lot of points to keep up with the Ravens offense, who has been playing better recently. So he has some potential this week if you're in a deeper league and are desperate for a quarterback, whether it's an injury or a bye week. But I also like him more so because of his long term value.
Yeah, definitely some long-term value there. We've talked about him a lot in the offseason and stuff, but yeah, Lions were a tougher matchup as well. They were like among the best in the league like limiting yards per passing attempt, and they were top 5 in that regard in receiving yards after the catch allowed as well per completion. So they're a pretty, tight matchup, I guess, the Lions, and then there's going to be better matchups ahead. The Ravens, they've actually been playing better like recently since they started deploying 3 full-time safeties as well. So getting more defensive backs on the field obviously helps. Like they haven't allowed a passing touchdown in 2 straight games now, I think, right? And rank among like the 10 best teams in NFL passer rating allowed over the last 2 as well. So yeah, it's not, maybe as nice of a matchup this week, but like Nate said, like better matchups going forward through and in the long term as well there for JJ McCarthy. So worth a shot. And then Nate, next up, I mean, we lost Jaden Daniels to a disgusting injury on Sunday night, obviously. So we might need a replacement for him. Marcus Mariota of the Washington Commanders steps in. Pretty widely available, obviously, with the Daniels injury.
Oh, yeah. Anyone who saw the injury wanted to look away, but everything we've heard since then, it doesn't seem as bad as it looked, which is good news at least. We don't know how long he'll be out. He'll be out at least a couple of games at least. But so we expect Marcus Mariota to be the starter for Washington. He has been the starter for 3 other games this season, finished quarterback 6, quarterback 17, and quarterback 19 in those games. So not the greatest finishes, but we know he's capable of having big games. And the Commanders have the 3rd best schedule for quarterbacks over the rest of the way, especially these next couple weeks face the Detroit Lions, Miami Dolphins, 2 teams who have allowed plenty to quarterbacks so far this season. With Detroit, it's because teams have to keep up with Detroit's offense, and with Miami, it's just their secondary hasn't played as well. And then they also have the bye week and a couple rough matchups in there. But if Jaden Daniels is out for the rest of the season, then Mariota not just has a good next couple weeks, but also a good fantasy playoffs. They face their 3 division rivals during the fantasy playoffs. That includes the Giants and Cowboys, 2 of the top 3 teams at allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. So if Mariota remains a starter for the rest of the year, he is someone who has very good matchups in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, obviously, a bummer that we lost Jaden Daniels because it could have been him benefiting from that. But, Mariota, this is the way that this season has been going, right? We've been losing multiple fantasy starters every single week. So not really surprised there that we lose another one. But yeah, we'll see how the Commanders season is going too, right? Like if it's not going well, they lose a bunch of games. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Daniels doesn't come back this season. So Mariota, a fine fill-in if needed. Before we get into the running backs, I want to let everybody know that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. As the days get shorter and colder, it can really take a toll on how we feel. This time of year can be tough for a lot of people. It's a great reminder to reach out and check in with the people you care about. Maybe that means calling your grandma, writing a letter to a friend, finally grabbing lunch with someone you haven't seen in a while. We're all healthier when we stay connected, when we have community and support. And just like reaching out to a friend, starting therapy can take a bit of courage. Once you do, you might find yourself wondering, why didn't I do this sooner? BetterHelp makes it easy to start therapy. You'll be matched with a licensed therapist based on your needs and preferences, so you could focus on your growth and goals. Over 12 years of experience, more than 30,000 therapists, over 5 million people helped worldwide with an average live session rating 4.9 out of 5. Not happy with your match? You can switch therapists anytime, no hassle. This month, don't wait to reach out, whether that's checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself. BetterHelp makes it easier to take that first step. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/PFF. That's betterhelp.com/PFF. All right, on to the running backs now, Nate. And led by Tennessee Titans, Tajay Spears. We'll see if Tony Pollard does indeed get moved by today's deadline. But the good thing about Spears' value is that it doesn't have to happen for him to be a waiver wire target here, Nate.
Oh, yeah, not the biggest week for waiver wire running backs. The injuries that we've had at running backs recently have all been for teams where the backup's already taken in the majority of leagues. We saw with the Patriots, with the Chiefs. Kareem Hunt's taken in most leagues. Travion Henderson taken in most leagues. So Tyjae Spears is someone who has performed relatively well since he's returned from injury, has averaged 10.6 PPR points over the past 4 weeks, which is 26th best among running backs. So he has been right at that borderline of being a fantasy starter. He is still the clear receiving back and backup to Tony Pollard right now, but the Titans are playing from behind in most of their games. So that means they need their receiving back on the field more often. So, like you said, there is a chance that Tony Pollard gets traded, in which case Spears I'd expect to play roughly 80% of the offensive snaps, which is excellent for a fantasy running back. So Spears would have a ton of value if Tony Pollard does get traded. But even if he doesn't, Spears is probably the best option if you're looking for a running back more long term. But if you're looking for a running back in the short term, probably not the best option because the Titans do have their bye week next week.
Yeah, they got their bye week, and like you said, even with Pollard, like 10 touches this past week, right? So we know the Titans are going to be trailing. We know that Tajay Spears is going to be involved in the passing game there. So some nice value for Spears. Pretty, not he's getting close to that rostership of 50%, right? 44% right now. So this might be the last week we talk about him. We'll see. But well, actually, he's heading into a bye, so maybe that number doesn't jump up a ton. But I mean, if a Pollard trade does happen, that'll definitely be a great value boost there for Tajay Spears. So another player who's value, I think, could skyrocket, obviously, with a deadline trade today. Isaiah Davis of the New York Jets. Brees Hall, one of the more rumored names to be drawing interest recently. Otherwise, Davis will just continue to serve as his handcuff here. But another player pretty widely available, Nate, over 90% of leagues, he's out there.
Oh, yeah. While Spears is the top player regardless, Davis pretty much needs a Brees Hall trade at this point for him to have fantasy value. He did play well recently. He totaled 65 rushing yards on 7 carries, 44 receiving yards on 5 catches in his last game, but I don't expect him to consistently be a huge part of the offense getting double-digit touches. So a lot just depends on if Brees Hall does get traded at some point today. If not, Davis is still the handcuff in New York, which is still there's only 32 handcuffs in the league. All the handcuffs have some value, and there are plenty of teams where it's not clear who's the backup is, where in New York it is very clear that Davis is the number 2 running back. No one else is seeing playing time outside of those two, so that gives them more value than a number of the handcuff running backs in the league. So it's still fine to pick him up in some of those leagues, but a lot of this does depend on if Brees Hall does get traded. If so, then you definitely want Davis because he's someone else who will play 75+% of the offensive snaps going forward.
Yep, makes perfect sense. All right, last week it was Tyrone Tracy that led us off on the waiver wire list of the New York Giants. He's obviously widely rostered now, but Devin Singletary, who was actually significantly involved in the first Scattaboo-less game this past week, is still only rostered in 5% of leagues.
Oh, yeah, they surprisingly rotated their running backs a lot more than we expected. Even a week ago when Scattaboo went down with the injury fairly early on in the game, we saw Tracy pretty well dominate snaps. So it was Tracy seeing 22 snaps compared to Singletary seeing 18 over the first 3 quarters or so. And then Tracy was dealing with an injury, in which case Singletary took over for the rest of the third quarter. That led Singletary to have more snaps in the game, more touches in the game. I don't think we've gotten too big up an update on Tracy's injury. I don't believe it is anything too serious. So there is at least a chance that Singletary is the short-term starter if Tracy does end up missing a game, in which case Singletary has a lot of value because New York does not have any other running backs on the roster. They did not elevate anyone off the practice squad this past week, so they just stuck with their 2 running backs. So I would expect Singletary to see a ton of volume if he is the only running back a week from now, but even if Tracy is healthy, the fact that they were so close together in snaps means that the Giants view these two pretty equally right now. So there's at least a chance that Singletary outplays Tracy over these next few weeks, in which case Singletary would probably take over and be the lead running back over the rest of the season.
Nice. Okay, and then coming off a bye week, Cleveland Browns running back Dylan Sampson. We still don't maybe know exactly if Quinshon Judkins will be available this week. He left last game with the shoulder injury. Have you seen anything new with Judkins, Nate?
What I've seen is that there's some optimism that Judkins plays, but I don't think it's any
Okay.
guarantee that Judkins plays. So in this case, it's the case that if Judkins doesn't play, Sampson would be the lead running back. He took over as the lead running back when Judkins went down with injuries 2 weeks ago. And then at the start of the season, before Judkins was playing, Sampson was the lead running back, someone who would not just lead the team in carries, but he's also been catching the ball a lot whenever he's on the field. So that certainly helps his PPR value. So it's more of a short-term play. If Judkins misses time, then Sampson could be your best option if you're looking for a running back this week. And then also the Browns have one of the best schedules for running backs over the rest of the season. So if you're at a point where bye weeks aren't too big of a concern for you and you're more so looking to fill your bench with high upside options, Sampson is probably one of the best handcuff options that you should be considering because of the Browns schedule.
Definitely. And like you said, catching passes as well, important in an offense where the Browns likely are going to be trailing quite a bit here. So added PPR value there for somebody like a Dylan Sampson. All right, we'll get to the kind of the, I guess, the handcuff options now, Nate. But actually, well, leading us off in New Orleans, rookie Devin Neal, he actually cut into Alvin Kamara's playing time a bit this week, Nate.
Yeah, there's actually a couple running backs here where there's a chance that they have more value going forward, but also a chance their value sinks to nothing. But I think Neal will be involved in the Saints offense over the rest of the season. With Kendre Miller landing on injured reserve a couple weeks ago, we did see Taysom Hill lead the team in rushing yards this past week, which you don't quite want to see if you're a Saints running back, but the Saints schedule is much easier over the rest of the season. They play their division rivals, and then they also play some of the teams with the worst records in the AFC over the rest of the year. So the Saints should be able to be a bit more competitive in games going forward. That should allow them to stick with the run game a lot more. They just switched to the rookie quarterback, and they probably want their run game to help their quarterback out. So I expect Neal to have a decent amount of volume going forward. I think there's a chance that he can take over as the lead early down running back. Kamara hasn't been all that effective this year, so there's a chance Kamara shifts to being more of a third down back and the team sees what they have in Neal so they can start making plans for 2026 and beyond. I did include Alvin Kamara in my five to add, five to drop, five to buy low, five to sell high as someone you should be buying low right now, just because plenty of people are willing to give up on Kamara, especially after his bad game this past week. But again, because the Saints schedule is so good, I expect them to be running the ball a lot more. So whether it's Kamara, whether it's Neal, whether it's a mix of the two, I'd be wanting to take a chance on them now, especially after neither of them did much of anything this past week.
Yeah, nobody really did anything, right? Like you said, Taysom Hill led the team in rushing with 30 yards, but like I think all of that came from one run, right? It was like a 29-yard run, so he had literally had one carry or 1 yard on three other carries. So, yeah, it's kind of a not a great backfielder offense right now, but Devin Neal getting some additional work, and like you said, this is another team that could be trailing here. We know Alvin Kamara is going to get some work in the passing game as well, so there's some reason for optimism, at least for fantasy purposes, if you are looking to target this Saints backfield. But we also got Blake Corum, who's still widely available of the Los Angeles Rams. Kyron Williams, look, he isn't going anywhere as long as he's healthy, but as always, kind of just in case here, Nate, Blake Corum could have some more value as the season goes on.
Yeah. First off, a handcuff, and so that's given him value throughout the season. He has played well given his opportunities. His role has been fairly consistent in the past couple of weeks, so I'm not expecting him to see a significant increase in snaps. But the thing is, a lot of the running backs we were talking about early on either have their bye week this upcoming week or just don't have a great matchup. So when I was trying to find a running back that I'm desperate this week for a running back, who'd I'd be looking to pick up? Corum stood out as someone who has a decent matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers defense hasn't been playing quite as well after Fred Warner's injury. So I think there's a chance Corum, even though he'll have pretty limited opportunities, he could have a big game. They did get him involved since the Rams had the blowout this past week. He had double-digit carries. So the Rams, if they have a lead, are perfectly willing to get Corum more involved. So this could be one of those weeks where Corum does see a decent amount of volume. So specifically, if you're in a deeper league, have running backs either injured or on a bye, looking for someone specifically for this week, Corum is someone that could be the top option for your team.
Nice. And then we have a rare 0.0% rostership option this week, Nate. Jarrett Patterson of the Los Angeles Chargers had 9 carries and actually outproduced Kamani Vidal this week.
Yeah, since the Chargers have dealt with their running back injuries, it seems like throughout the past 2 years in the preseason, even during the season, they've been pretty unsettled of who those backups should be. So even though Kamani Vidal had some good games in there, he's also had pretty quiet games in 2 of the past 3 weeks. So Patterson is the one who got more involved as the game progressed and ended up having the most rushing production this week. So there's at least a chance that Patterson could continue to be the primary running back for Los Angeles. It sounds like Hampton isn't expected to be back for the next couple of weeks still, even though he's eligible to return. So we'll continue to see this kind of rotation of running backs. Maybe there's a chance the Chargers look for someone via trade, which means Patterson wouldn't have any value anymore. But if you're in one of these deeper leagues, there's a chance that Patterson could be the lead running back. So while I definitely wouldn't want to take a chance on him in my starting lineup this week because I don't know how the snaps will be distributed between the running backs, there's plenty of these deeper leagues where anyone who has more than 5 carries is someone worth picking up. So Patterson, I think, has a little more value than a typical running back who just sees a couple carries in garbage time.
Nice. And then lastly, Terrell Jennings in New England. He got some work this week with Ramondre Stevenson out. He even vultured a touchdown from Travion Henderson, which, Henderson truthers were very excited about this week. And obviously, losing the touchdown there to Jennings didn't help. But if Stevenson misses any more time, then Jennings could be a little deep league option here.
Oh, yeah, they had a clear two-man backfield where Jennings was the backup on early downs. Henderson was the clear passing down back, and Jennings was used more often than not in those short yardage and goal line situations. So it was Jennings who scored the touchdown. Jennings was fairly consistently getting the ball when he was on the field. It doesn't seem like they want Henderson to be someone who has 15 plus touches in a game at this point. The Patriots have been rumored to be looking for a running back, so there's certainly a chance that they trade for one, in which case Jennings' value goes away completely. If Henderson is back, or if Stevenson is back this week, then I don't expect Jennings to continue to be involved in the offense all that much. Maybe he starts seeing a couple of snaps here and there, but only having Jennings here for if Stevenson continues to miss time and they don't trade for a running back, in which case, again, in these deeper leagues, he's going to have some value.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to get into the wide receivers in a second, but I'll let everybody know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Parenting is filled with high pressure decisions, and it can be difficult to tell if we've made the right choice for our kids' future. But here's a simple decision you can make today that could have a meaningful impact on your kid's future. Opening a UGMA Kids Investment Account with Fabric to start their investment journey early and give them a financial head start. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, and then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees and just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Okay, Nate, let's get into the wide receivers now. And honestly, it felt inevitable that Alec Pierce was going to get to the top of this wide receiver list sooner rather than later. The way we've been talking about him, the usage, the potential with that offense, and coming off a week that he saw with 13 targets, had 6 catches, 115 receiving yards. Pierce is wide receiver 1 on the waiver target list this week, Nate.
Yeah, I had a lot of those catches early on in the game, which was good to see that it was by design. Same thing that we've been saying for a month plus now. Pierce is the X receiver in Indianapolis. He's the deep threat, has a over 20 average depth of target, while the other Colts receivers are less than 10. So his role is distinct in Indianapolis's offense. So while the other wide receivers and Tyler Warren are competing for targets, Pierce's role is separate from all of that. So he should consistently get at least some targets each week. Because he has that high average depth of target, that leads to a lot of big plays, which is good to see. When you look at all of the wide receivers available on the waiver wire and what they've done this season, Pierce has 501 yards, which is the most for the wide receivers who are available. And the only problem is he hasn't scored a touchdown yet, which typically you see these deep threats scoring more touchdowns. So I expect some positive regression over the second half of the season, which will help him get more touchdowns and help him get more fantasy value, making him a more regular fantasy starter. The one thing to note is the Colts have a relatively rough schedule for wide receivers over the next few weeks. Also have their bye week in there. So if you're someone who thinks you need a wide receiver for the next month or so, Pierce might not be the best option. But if you are one of the teams who looks like you're going to make the fantasy playoffs, Pierce has an excellent schedule in the fantasy playoffs. So I think he is someone who can be in fantasy starting lineups when the games matter the most. So I would pick him up now. He might have to sit on your bench for a couple weeks, or if you're in a deeper league, even with the matchups, you might want him in your lineup. But he is someone that I would really want for the end of the season.
Yeah, that makes sense. And look, he still hasn't found the end zone, like you said. That's going to come. I think we're going to see some nice positive regression here over the latter half of the season. But let's talk about Parker Washington again, because now with Travis Hunter getting injured, landing on injured reserve, Brian Thomas Jr. also got banged up on Sunday. De'Ami Brown suffered a concussion. The Jags receiving options are dropping like flies, and it might be up to Parker Washington to make the most of his opportunities, which on Sunday he did that, Nate.
Yeah, the Jaguars have 5 wide receivers, and Parker Washington is the one wide receiver who remains healthy. So he should be getting a ton of targets going forward. He had a big week this past week. He's someone that we mentioned when it seemed like there was at least a small chance that Brian Thomas could get traded. Seems less likely now that Travis Hunter's on injured reserve, and it's harder to trade Thomas when he's injured. So don't see that happening today. But I think Parker Washington should see significant playing time. When the wide receivers were healthy at the start of the game, Washington was consisting in 3 wide receiver sets, and then it was basically a 3-man rotation for the 2 spots in the 2 wide receiver sets. So Washington was seeing plenty of playing time. Even De'Ami Brown was seeing significant playing time before his injury. So once Brown is healthy again, he is also someone worth considering. But the main reason Washington isn't the top wideout is because they have a pretty rough schedule over the next 2 weeks. They face the Houston Texans, face the Los Angeles Chargers, 2 of the top teams at preventing fantasy points to wide receivers. But even with the tough matchups, you will still see plenty of volume. So if you have multiple wide receivers on a bye week this week, Washington still might be your best option despite the matchups.
Yeah, and lots of wide receivers on a bye this week. Obviously, the Bengals wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, got Rashee Rice at the Chiefs, and then the other team is Tennessee. But yeah, there's plenty of star wide receivers that we might have to get a fill-in option for this week. Okay, sorry, my voice. I got to try to stop talking so much. Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders is up next, Nate. Tucker, he owned the previous best fantasy performance of the season heading into this week until his teammate Brock Bowers dethroned him. But Trey Tucker still available in a fair amount of leagues as one of his other teammates has kind of been heavily rumored in trade talks as well this year, Nate.
Yeah, Tucker has averaged 12.7 fantasy points per game this season, so he remains one of the top players available on the waiver wire just in terms of how much production he's had so far this season. I also think he could have a ton of value if Jacoby Myers ends up getting traded. We did see this past week Tyler Lockett recently signed with the team, and he took over as the 3rd wide receiver over the 2 rookies that they have with the Raiders. So it seems pretty clear that Tucker is well ahead of everyone else on the depth chart outside of Myers. So even though Brock Bowers should continue to lead the team in targets, even if Jacoby Myers gets traded, Tucker should be the number 2 option in the passing game going forward if Myers does get traded. And even if Myers doesn't get traded, he hasn't been quite as involved with the offense, dealt with injuries a little bit in there. So I think Tucker could continue to be a borderline fantasy starter most weeks. And they have a great matchup with the Dallas Cowboys in week 11. So even if you're not picking him up specifically for this week, in 2 weeks from now, he should have a big game.
Nice. Okay. Chimray DK, not just a fun name to say, but an electric player with the ball in his hands. He returned a punt for a touchdown this week, Nate, but he's also getting work on offense as well in Tennessee. So Chimray DK, widely available as well.
Yeah, we've seen Calvin Ridley miss time recently due to injury, and DK has stepped up not just as the clear slot receiver with Tyler Lockett no longer on the team, but he has been playing significantly in two wide receiver sets. 2 weeks ago, it was Van Jefferson who stopped seeing playing time in two receiver sets. This past week, it was Alec Ayumanor who did not see as much time in two receiver sets. So it is DK who is most consistently being on the field over these past 2 weeks. So even with Calvin Ridley potentially coming back soon, I expect DK to continue to be the primary wide receiver in two receiver sets as well as three receiver sets along with Ridley. There were also reports that the Titans could be looking to trade Ridley. They're basically open to trading pretty much anyone on the roster, and Ridley fits that description. He hasn't had the great this season before his injury, so I think there is a chance that Ridley gets traded, in which case I'd expect DK to be the best wide receiver in this offense over the second half of the season. And it's always good to take chances on rookies, especially at this point when over half of the teams in the league have had their bye week already. Bye weeks aren't having their toll on fantasy rosters as much week after week. So I would start filling your bench with rookies who could have a big second half of the season. And I think DK definitely fits that description at wide receiver.
Nice, I like that. And yeah, we got some other rookies that we'll talk about in just a sec. But first, we're going to talk about somebody who's maybe cutting into some of the playing time of our potential rookies here, which I don't love. I'm not going to lie. Considering the Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll, they look pretty good when they got the opportunity last week. But Christian Kirk is still getting more work here. Who knows if this will stick, or at least maybe I hope it doesn't. To give the young guys a chance. But for now, and based on his usage last week, he makes the list here this week, Nate.
Yeah, like you said, Noel had a couple good games recently, but Houston went right back to their wide receiver rotation with their wide receivers healthy again. Nico Collins, the clear top receiver. Jaden Higgins basically mostly playing in two wide receiver sets, and then Xavier Hutchinson and Kirk joining Collins in the three wide receiver sets. The reason Kirk is here is particularly because of this upcoming week, has faces the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's a revenge game in there, which doesn't really matter too much for this, but it's still fun nonetheless. But the Jaguars are a fairly good matchup for wide receivers. A lot of the wide receivers we've talked about so far either don't have good matchups or have bye weeks or various reasons why you might not want to start them this upcoming week. So if you're in one of these deeper leagues, and like you said, lots of wide receivers on bye weeks, there is a chance that Kirk is the best fill-in specifically for this week, but I don't have too much hope for Kirk long-term. Like you said, the rookies are there, potentially will start cutting into Kirk's playing time going forward, and the matchups aren't the greatest over the course of the rest of the season, but he is here specifically if you need a wide receiver this week.
Gotcha. And then speaking of young wide receivers who maybe deserve more opportunities, Torrey Horton had a great game on Sunday with Cooper Kupp out of the lineup. Horton scored a couple of touchdowns on 48 receiving yards, 4 receptions. We don't know if Kupp will miss more time or not, but Horton looked good and probably may have earned himself maybe a bigger role here.
Yeah, the entire Seattle passing game looked very good this past week. Horton catching 4 passes, 2 touchdowns in there. So far, he has very consistently been the third wide receiver in Seattle's offense. Cooper Kupp consistently playing in 2 wide receiver sets when he's healthy. There hasn't really been much change in that throughout the entire season, so haven't had much reason to write about the Seattle wide receivers in my recap articles this season until this past week. But Horton basically took over as the number 2 receiver in both 2 and 3 wide receiver sets. It was no surprise whatsoever. We would have expected that if all the wide receivers were healthy outside of Cooper. But Seattle also had their 4th and 5th wide receivers inactive this week due to injury. So it was no surprise whatsoever that Horton was the very clear number 2 wide receiver. So this is one where I would not start Horton in the short term unless Cooper Kupp is out for another week. But Horton is someone who could overtake Cooper Kupp at some point this season. We see rookies end up becoming starters at all points of the season. So there is a chance that it happens at some point later this season. So he is another rookie that I'd be happy to take a chance on at this point of the year, even though there's a chance he might not work out at any other point this week. But there is a chance he becomes the starter and the clear number two option in this passing game that currently looks very good.
Yeah, nice. I love Torrey Horton. Yeah, so hoping to see him get some more work. But we got more rookies, Nate. This time, Kyle Williams of the New England Patriots on the list after he filled in for an injured Kayshon Boutte this past week.
Yeah, it sounds like Kayshawn might even be ready to come back this week, in which case Kyle Williams might not see that big of an increase in playing time. But Williams did basically take over as the X receiver after the injury this past week, led to Williams seeing his most playing time he's seen all season this year. I know it was Demario Douglas who had the big game, largely from a big catch. I'm surprised Douglas doesn't see more playing time, but he has been playing roughly 50% of snaps in 11 personnel only. So that leaves them with around 30% of offensive snaps over the entire game. So even though it's Douglas who's available on the waiver wire who had the big game, I would not trust Douglas at this point until he has a bigger role in the offense. And it doesn't look like they have any plans to increase his role. So if you are looking for a Patriots wide receiver, right now it'll be Williams, but if Kayshawn is back in the short term, then Williams would probably go back to being the fifth wide receiver on the depth chart.
Gotcha. And then we got another, I guess an injury fill-in, right? Because we did see T. Higgins get hurt late for the Bengals he had a great week 9 game, but near the end of that game. But so Andre Yoshivas becomes an option here if Higgins' injury keeps him out past the team's week 10 bye, Nate.
Yeah, he's been consistently the number 3 wide receiver for Cincinnati these past 2 years because Cincinnati has so many other weapons that hasn't given him much fantasy value. But like you said, Higgins dealing with the injury at the end of the game. The Bengals were in 11 personnel for the entire game, so it's not like his playing time increased, but I would expect him to play more in 2 wide receiver sets of T. Higgins misses time. I don't think we've heard much of an update about the injury, which isn't all that surprising because the Bengals have their bye week this upcoming week, so has 2 weeks to recover. That means that there's a pretty decent chance Higgins could be ready again in 2 weeks from now, but on the off chance he's not ready, Josivas could have a ton of value in this Bengals offense as the number 2 option in the passing game. We've seen the Bengals this past week have 3 wide receivers who all put up decent value. So a good chance Josivas could have a lot of value if T. Higgins ends up missing time. So I'd rather pick him up now if you have that roster spot, because if we get an announcement that Higgins is out 2 to 3 weeks, then a lot of people will be rushing to pick him up.
Yeah, good call. And then lastly, I'm looking to see if there's nothing yet. So I'm hoping that maybe, something comes across while we're talking about it. But the Saints wide receivers have been on the trade rumor list for a while now. Still nothing yet, but just in case, Devon Vele could see an increased role, Nate.
Yeah, there's been rumors that Rashid Shaheed could get traded, rumors that Brandon Cooks could get traded, rumors that teams want Chris Olave. It seems a little less likely that the Saints are willing to trade Olave after how well he's been playing so far this year. But I could see Vele, even though he hasn't had much production so far this year, he's been the clear number 4 wide receiver. He did deal with injuries a little bit early on in the season as well. He would step up to at least the number 3 receiver, but especially if Rashid Shaheed gets traded, I could see Vele eventually overtaking Brandon Cooks as the number 2 receiver in this offense. And the schedule does get better for them over the rest of the year, so there's a chance Vele could have some decent value. So I probably don't want him in 10-team leagues, probably not even in most 12-team leagues, but in some of these deeper leagues where there's not great options available on the waiver wire, I think Vele could end up as a pretty decent option compared to those who are available.
Nice. Yeah, and we'll keep an eye on that. And obviously, like Nate said at the top of the show, if anything does happen trade wise, we're not talking about it on the show. You can always check out the waiver wire article, which will get updated later today. So let's talk some tight ends now, Nate. And leading us off is Isaiah Likely of the Baltimore Ravens, who had his best game of the season in Week 9. Unfortunately, so did Mark Andrews, who scored twice, but still hope here for Isaiah Likely, Nate.
Yeah, he had his best game. Lamar Jackson was back, which definitely helps the tight ends. We've seen the rotation look pretty much exactly the same as it was last year, which isn't ideal for the Ravens tight ends. But the good news is the Ravens have the best schedule for tight ends over the rest of the season. It's excellent matchup after excellent matchup. From weeks 13 to 17, all five matchups are against teams in the bottom five at preventing fantasy points to tight ends. So it's a top five matchup in 5 straight weeks, including playing the Bengals twice in there. The Bengals have allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends. So even though you don't know who between Andrews and Likely you can trust in any given week, there's a chance that both of them could have a lot of fantasy value over the rest of the season. So even though it'll be a little bit of a headache, I could see Likely being a top 10 tight end over the rest of the season thanks to this schedule. And there's at least a small chance Andrews gets traded today. I'm not expecting it, but it could happen.
Nice. Yeah, that'd be a fun one. So we also saw a massive Colston Loveland game in week 9, including that game-winning touchdown where the entire Bengals defense folded like a cheap suit again. But even without that play, Loveland still would have been on this list as he was last week, Nate.
Yeah, I had 5 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown before that last play of the game. Was by far his best game of the season, even before the game-winning touchdown. And then the game-winning touchdown just adds to that. Had more receiving yards in this one game than he had all the rest of his games put together. He was the clear number 2 tight end to start the season after the Bears bye week. He was rotating with Cole Kmet a bit. Kmet has been dealing with an injury, which has increased Loveland's playing time. But after this game, I wouldn't be surprised if Loveland continues to be the clear number 1 tight end going forward. Also has a fine matchup against the Giants this upcoming week. So if you need a tight end specifically for this week, I think he's a good option. But even long term, he was drafted with the 10th overall pick in the draft for a reason. He is a very talented player. And the Bears haven't had a consistent number 2 option in the passing game outside of Roma Dunze. So Loveland could emerge as that number 2 option in this offense over the course of the rest of the season.
Yeah, you mentioned Romo Dunze, and as a Romo Dunze fantasy manager, I did quite a few spots. I was pretty frustrated for a team that scored almost 50 points, and he didn't get a single catch. But he also dropped one in the end zone. It was a little behind him, but he should have had that one at least. But kind of frustrating. But yeah, love to see Loveland increasing his playing time, his usage, his production, all of that. So next up is Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. We've talked about him before, Nate, but he led the Texans in receiving yards this past week on 6 catches with 77 yards. So another guy that, again, we might be looking for tight end replacements this week, especially with one of the big ones going down, Tucker Kraft with an ACL. So Dalton Schultz could make sense for some teams.
Yeah, heading into the season, Schultz was someone that most fantasy managers weren't considering. He only averaged 7 fantasy points per game last season. The Texans added 2 rookie wide receivers. It seemed like Schultz would be one of the worst fantasy tight ends this season, and at his age, we weren't expecting much improvement. But he has fairly consistently been a big part of this Texans passing game, regardless of who is healthy, who isn't healthy. We saw everyone healthy this past week, and Schultz was very involved in the passing game. Has averaged 12 PPR points since week 5, which ranks 13th best among tight ends. So he has been right on that borderline of being a fantasy starter. So while he's not the most exciting option, we don't expect him to have a huge improvement over the second half of the season like we could with Likely or that we could with Loveland. Schultz is someone who you can put in your fantasy starting lineup and expect a pretty decent return. Faces the Jacksonville Jaguars next week, which is a fairly favorable matchup. So if you need a tight end this week, I'd consider him. But he is also someone that you can just put in regardless of which tight end has a bye week, and he can be in your fantasy starting lineup.
I like that. And then Darren Waller's still on the list here, Nate. We talked about him and why he's out there. Obviously, he's on IR right now, but could be back and has a nicer schedule in the fantasy playoffs as well.
Oh, yeah, we'll basically be talking about him every week until the fantasy playoffs, so it'll be the weekly Darren Waller spot, and nothing will be different every week because we won't get an update on his injury for a little while, but he's on injured reserve right now, expected to miss some time, but he averaged 15.2 PPR points per game over the 3 weeks that he was healthy. So we know he's capable of being a top end fantasy tight end. If he can get fully healthy for the fantasy playoffs, he has contest against the Pittsburgh Steelers and Cincinnati Bengals, the 2 defenses that have allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So no guarantee Waller will get healthy at any point this season. A chance he misses the rest of the season, a chance he's not 100%. But if he is healthy for those matchups, he could be a league winning tight end.
Nice. And then AJ Barner, another guy that we've talked about quite a bit in Seattle, still pretty involved there in their passing offense as well. Not like a massive game by any means this past week, but he's still out there and getting the snaps. And obviously we've seen the production from him before. So another guy that could be a nice fill in here if we need him.
Yeah, he has averaged 9.4 PPR points per game, so not quite what you want to see from a fantasy starting tight end. Ranked 17th on the year, but he's only behind Dalton Schultz among those available on the waiver wire and that are healthy this season. So he has played well compared to a lot of the other tight ends available on the waiver wire. A nice, interesting wrinkle is that teams have been trying to adapt the tush push. A couple of teams have been using their tight end for their tush push player, and Seattle is one of them with Barner. We've seen it with Mark Andrews, and then Connor Hayward's the only other tight end who has done it more than once this season outside of these two. But Barner had been doing it just for 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situations. This past week, they used him on the goal line in this situation, leading to a touchdown. So there's a chance that Barner could be used and score a couple more touchdowns over the rest of the season, as well as being a highly graded tight end. So there's still the problem that Seattle's offense is good. They run the ball a lot when they're winning. They run the ball a lot even when the games are close. So that doesn't lead to a lot of volume. And Jackson Smith-Njigba is getting 40+% of the targets. So that makes it harder for anyone else in the offense. But Barner, I think, has the talent to be a fantasy starting tight end if Seattle just throws them enough passes. And there's a chance that these tush pushes at the 1 yard line could help him, his fantasy value, get to the top 12 range. Faces the Arizona Cardinals next week. Cardinals have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to tight ends. So if you're in one of these deeper leagues and aren't able to get someone like Loveland, I think Barner is someone who can be your week 10 replacement.
Nice. And then last tight end on the list here, I referenced it just before. Obviously, the Tucker Craft injury, torn ACL, he is out for the year. So Luke Musgrave gets his shot to kind of be the tight end one here in Green Bay. It's a nice spot potentially for him. Somebody that I think is a talented receiving tight end. Obviously, he was stuck behind Tucker Craft, so maybe there's a chance here that he finally starts to produce as a potential fantasy starting tight end. Nate.
Yeah, I would probably mostly look for him in some of these deeper leagues where there's not other great options at tight end. We saw Musgrave rotate a little bit with John Fitzpatrick, where we weren't seeing Tucker Craft in much of a rotation. So Musgrave played 23 of 29 snaps, and after the 5th drive of the game, after Kraft went down. So Musgrave playing a lot in 12 personnel, most of the 11 personnel snaps, but not quite all of the 11 personnel snaps. So not quite what you want to see. And then the Packers have been hurting a lot at wide receiver recently. Should be getting Dontayvion Wicks back soon. We should see Jaden Reed back soon. Wouldn't be all that surprised if the Packers start introducing 10 personnel in their passing game, because they do have too many wide receivers and not enough targets and playing time to go around for those wide receivers. So that could also be a detriment to Musgrave, but there's a chance. He was a former 2nd-round pick. The main reason he wasn't playing is because Kraft was there and he's dealt with injuries throughout his career. So a chance Musgrave could be more talented than what we've seen recently in the NFL, in which case there's a chance he has a big rest of the season, but I'm not necessarily expecting it. And if you did lose Tucker Kraft, I would probably look for a lot of the other names we mentioned before you would consider Musgrave.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, we'll see how he does here. The rest of the season. Obviously, Kraft isn't coming back, so there's opportunity, at least some, anyways. But yeah, like you said, some decent tight end options out there for us to choose from. So that's going to do it for today. Obviously, no trades happened while we were recording, I don't think, which naturally means that the second we end the recording, there will be something, which Nate will add again in that waiver wire article, as well as other pieces throughout the week. But thank you to everybody who did tune in. Good luck, as always, attacking those waiver wires. Stay active all season long, and make sure to tune in here and lock in with all the content we have on PFF.com, powered by the best data collection team in the multiverse here at PFF. So, Nate, please do remind everybody what you have going on over at PFF.com this week.
Sure. At this point, I have my recap articles for all the games that happened this past weekend, the usage and production report, rest of season rankings for this upcoming week, 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high. As we've referenced a couple of times, we have the waiver wire article, which will get updated if there's any moves today. Then I will have my dynasty rankings tomorrow, and then start sit the day after that. And then we'll do it all again next week.
Love it. Yep. And use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off if you are interested in a PFF Plus subscription. You'll also get access to all my work as well, IDP Fantasy Report, which will have all the snap shares for IDPs. I talk some of the trades that happen on the defensive side in there as well, waiver wire targets, all of that kind of stuff. Then IDP rankings, the wide receiver man zone coverage report will be out on Wednesday, and the red zone report as well will be out on Friday. So use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off. I will be back on Thursday doing the IDP start sit. Hopefully, I could make it through an entire episode without my voice cracking and breaking. It should be better by then. We'll see. But good luck to everybody in week 10. And until next time, peace out.